and we are going to go ahead and get started. So on behalf of WECARE and the Tunisia College of Pharmacy, Reach Up Incorporated, and Moffitt Cancer Center, we'd like to welcome you to today's workshop. Today, we're going to explore the ABCs of clinical trials and allow you to know what you should know about it.
Hand over the money to the concerned party.
We'll ask everyone to please mute your mic if you're not speaking, so that we just kind of can keep everything going. But we would love for you, if you don't mind, to utilize or test the chat and put where you're from so that we can appreciate who all is represented. We're so excited. We had a lot of pre-registrants today, and so we want to definitely just appreciate where all of you are from. I'm Angela Hill, the program director for WECARE, and WECARE is an acronym that stands for Work Group Enhancing Community Advocacy, Research, and Education. It is the community outreach arm of the Tunisia College of Pharmacy at the University of South Florida. And our executive director and dean for the college, Dr. Kevin Snead, who you'll be hearing from later on, actually established WECARE in an attempt to help close the gap in health disparities, particularly in our marginalized populations, and also strengthen clinical trial success by developing methods to help with having more successful recruitment and retention of individuals in clinical trials. And so today's workshop is just one of many that we are providing to really provide education on the subject of clinical trials and research. Some of the other areas that we've explored, some of you may have heard about us through our work with the pandemic, and we'll be talking a little bit about that as well today. We've done a lot of work in the realm of cancer disparities, Alzheimer's care, mental health, and just other issues that really affect, again, our Black and Brown populations. So I would like to allow our WECARE team to introduce themselves, and we'll be introducing the speakers later today. And as I said, I'm the program director, but I'm also the Associate Dean of Clinical Affairs in the Tunisia College of Pharmacy. And Dr. Snead is on. So Dr. Snead, if you can raise your hand for everyone to see. And then we have Dr. Deborah Austin, who represents one of our primary community partners, and the work that she's doing, and Mr. Michael Morgan and others at Reach Up are allowing us to provide these programmings, and we are so ever grateful to partner with them. Reach Up, if you're not familiar with, prides themselves on providing services to the family in general, but focusing on fetal and maternal health. And so we're just so happy to have Dr. Austin on board. We also have Ms. Pascal Edouard with us today, and she is a member of our team and assisting us with data and dissemination, as well as representing other areas at the university, such as our College of Public Health. And we have our student ambassador, Mr. Joseph Diamond, here today. He's a first-year student, but he actually has an internship with AHEC and is also working with Mrs. Edouard to do some research and help us as we're capturing our impact for our program. So as mentioned, we have established a program today that's going to expose you to the ABCs of clinical research. And what we'll do at the end of the program is allow you to appreciate a video telling you a little bit more about WECARE. But what I'd like to do now is to have Dr. Snead kind of start us off a little bit and talk to us a little bit about the brevity of why we need to do workshops like this, why clinical trials are important. And certainly we know as there's been a lot of concerns during the pandemic about how quick the vaccines were made to address the COVID pandemic. And Dr. Snead has been really involved in the research realm for COVID care. And he himself is not only a pharmacist, but he has a background in microimmunology. He's an ambulatory care specialist, and he's worked for years and still practices on campus in our health center, providing patients care with metabolic syndrome and other chronic disorders. And so we're going to get his insights real quick, and then we'll shift over to one of our community health educators who's a partner of ours, Ms. Kalia Fleming, and she's going to share some information information about a potential trial that you all might want to consider participating in, as well as some other key information in regards to clinical trials. So Dr. Snead will allow you to kind of get us going this afternoon.
Okay, that will be fine. If someone could enable me to be able to share my screen, I will be. And while we're getting that up and going, Dr. Hill, thank you very much. It's always really great to be here with all of my WECARE team. Our former graduate student, Dr. Kalia Fleming, really happy to be here. As I was kind of reviewing, I saw some old work that she and I did together and many, many years ago. And then, of course, having our student here, Mr. Joseph Diamond, one of our AHEC scholars, I believe, Dr. Hill, if I recall. So I'm very happy about that now. So, okay, I'm the now co-host. I'm going to show you all just a very quick presentation here, and unfortunately, much of the information on here really hasn't changed over a period of time. I actually put an old video in here, and so I want you all to take a look and see what the effect of the pandemic has done, especially as I kind of look here and I have all this hair on my head and it's so curly. I looked at the video I'm going to show to you and I said, man, I remember when I used to look like that. So we'll go ahead and get started right now. So I'm just going to very quickly kind of go back in time a little bit and kind of share with you all why I became so passionate about getting greater representation in clinical research, the importance of it. And a great deal of it started before we even opened our college here, as I began to immerse into pharmacogenomics and what that means. And but more importantly, even some of the prior community clinical research I was involved in. And so one of the things that, I want to clear up a misconception is the fact that when we talk about health disparities, very often we, just the term, and we've tried to get into other terms now in terms of health inequities and other components, health equity, health inequity. But we also have to kind of keep in mind historically where we've been. WECARE, and I want to really thank Dr. Austin and Dr. Hill a great deal for having put together a very wonderful program about the Tuskegee experiment. If you have the opportunity, I believe you can go into the e-library with Reach Up Incorporated, and you can probably find that program. But when it comes to health disparities, we can't solely attribute it just to race. I mean, there's so many different things that go on in terms of the other components, the social determinants of health that really go into systemic problems, whether it be subliminal, completely overtly discriminatory, lack of access to care, and other components. And so what we need to do now, especially as we approach the second quarter, listen to me, the second quarter of the 21st century, we have to begin to put the rearview mirror much smaller. And then, as I often say, there's a reason the rearview mirror in your car is very small, and that your windshield is very wide, because we need to move forward. We need to know where we're going, but we need the information from the history and what's behind us to inform us of what's going on for the future. And I think that's what we're doing now in terms of bringing together health inequity research, social determinants of health research, and really building a large community and getting the community much more involved in that type of research. I bring this in because, again, this was one of the first indicators for me personally in the research I had done out in the community that we had a very particular problem. And without going into the entire study, I ran a program called InShape. InShape stood for the Intercollaborative Student Health Assessment Project and Evaluation. And basically, we went out to about 5 churches that were 4 were African American, 1 was Latino or Hispanic, and we didn't do health fairs, but we did health screening. And in one of the health screens, we actually had a question: do you have diabetes or not? That was the very simple question that we were asking all of the participants. Now, if you look off to the far right, you can kind of see the fact under the discussion area. That, when we began screening for diabetes, actually 37% of the people that indicated that they did not have diabetes actually did have diabetes. Now, at the time that I did this study out in the community, that was a much higher number than what was being reported in the literature, which was indicating that only about 20% of people that were not aware that they were diabetic were actually diabetic. And our study that was done right here in a fairly large sample right here in the Tampa Bay area indicated that 37% of the people that indicated on a very simple question, yes or no, do you have diabetes? And they indicated no. And as we went back and really began to analyze the data and do more focus group information, I began to realize that it was much deeper than just having people know that they were diabetic or not. We found that there were people that actually probably knew and had it indicated that they might be diabetic, but actually were afraid to actually check the box on an anonymous survey. And so now the psyche of what we were doing out in the community took on a whole new meaning and a whole new realm of why we needed to get more people involved in clinical research and why we needed to get far more people involved in buying into their health overall. So there's been much discussion for many decades now as to why we have so much a lack of participation in clinical research. Again, a very busy slide here, but overall, many people don't want to be involved in clinical research because they perceive that there's going to be some level of harm. And now we have to do much more behavioral research to understand exactly what harm are we talking about. Because even when the clinical research does not involve, for example, a medication or something that may cause an adverse reaction or something that could lead to death or perceived death, many people still don't want to know much more about the health. And overall, as we have often said, and I've often told people in many communities, whether it's a diverse community or not, will often value material things much more than they will value their own health. They will take care of their car more than they will take care of their own health needs. And so much more research needs to go into understanding exactly why we have such a low participation in clinical research. My journey also took me to better understand what was happening in some of our communities around the country. I went and I explored people out west with some of our Indian communities or native Indian communities here in our country. I went and talked to people up in the Atlanta area associated with Morehouse College and really began to understand what are they doing to try and increase minority participation in clinical research. And overall, I just really began to find that we needed to get much more stakeholder involvement from the community. And more often than not, if you did not have stakeholder involvement from the community, you were very rarely going to accomplish getting more people from that community to participate in any level of clinical research. And so we needed to do much more in terms of connecting the academic environment with the community environment in a much more trusting and much more efficient manner than what we had done in the past. Just for time's sake, I'm not going to worry much about this particular slide, but here, bullet point number 5, it really began to understand that this was not just an African-American problem. It's not just it really was more of a systemic problem when it came to dealing with very many ethnic and different background communities. So what were some of the things that we did here, both with the Center for Equal Health and for WECARE? We've really been working hard to build a community-driven clinical research network. And so what you see here, especially beginning with the Community Research Council, that is now the WECARE Research Council. That comprises myself, Dr. Hill, Mr. Hiram Green, who we often call Dr. Pastor Hiram Green, and Deborah Austin. But we kind of set the stage for now being able to do much more of the executive management for WECARE. And in the yellow here on the right, you see the Community Research Review Committee. And now we have people who are from the community actually participating in the clinical review research process. We have actual researchers that will come and meet with that review committee. At that point, they will question the researcher, not in a way of trying to keep them out of anything, but also trying to make sure that we have greater involvement. And then hopefully the goal is going to be that we have much more involvement in clinical research. Here I begin to show that here WECARE is in the middle. We will be the drivers of trying to increase clinical research here in the community. But we have to do that with a partnership that will involve, for example, USF, the Moffitt Cancer Center, our institutional partners, Moffitt and Tampa General, We have to build a stronger relationship with known entities out in the community. Here on the far left in the bottom, you see the Divine Nine. Oops, I'm sorry. And then further on, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and clergy have been a very, very key component for helping us to access many people in our communities. And so I'm going to pause right there and just say, just wanted to give a very, very quick and brief background in terms of the importance of why we need, oh, I do have to show one more thing. Dr. Hill, do I have 2 more minutes? Because, 2 more minutes. I got to show, I got to show Beyonce.
Sure. Sure.
I got to show Beyonce here. I forgot to show Beyonce. So I like, if you've seen me lecture before, I show this all the time because it underscores exactly what I've been talking about. Here we have a picture of a very young Tiger Woods, Beyonce right here in the middle, and Lenny Kravitz on the bottom. Visually, when we talk about them, we would say that they're all African American. They're all kind of in the sort of in the same age group. And if we imagine that they all had the very same disease state, if we gave all 3 of them the very same medication, could we say with 100% assurity that it would work appropriately? And I say, no, we can't, because their backgrounds are different. Tiger Woods had an Asian mother, African-American father. Beyonce had what we would call 2 traditional African-American parents, and Lenny Kravitz had an African-American mother and a Caucasian father, meaning that their DNA makeup is different. And so as we're moving forward into a genomic age, we're hearing now about Omicron. I don't want to talk about that today, but we're able to figure out all of these different things because of genomics and because of our ability to sequence DNA and RNA and all these different components. And so again, I'll stop right there. I just wanted to share with you that if we don't get more people from communities involved in clinical research, then eventually, as brand new therapeutics are coming onto the market that are much more driven around your DNA as an individual, and not the demographics of whether or not you're Caucasian or African American, Latino, Asian, Asian Indian, Asian or Indian or Pacific Islander or other, then we're going to get left behind. And so I'll pause right there and turn it back over to Dr. Hill, but thank you for allowing me to kind of give a background around why clinical research in the community is so important.
I'm actually going to pass the baton over to Mr. Diamond.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Snead?
Yeah, any questions or comments or anything at all? Again, and just in a 10-minute period is very difficult, but another thing that really has come up lately has been the impact of having medications that are really geared towards specific ethnic groups, and a lot of controversy has gone around that. And so as we continue to do that, as we move into an age of genomics around immunotherapy and cancer research, we need far more people involved to make sure that by the time an individual becomes ill, that we have already tested the medication appropriately in terms of all people of all backgrounds, and therefore allowing the capability for an assurance or prior expectation of whether or not that medication will work appropriately according to their DNA makeup. Mr. Diamond, do we see any questions out there at all? And if not, I mean, that's fine. We'll keep things moving.
I have nothing right now for you.
Okay. But Dr. Hill, thank you very much. I'll be
No
on.
problem. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Dr. Snead, for setting the stage. I think you did a wonderful job explaining why it's important that we give some attention to this particular topic. So one of the things we want to encourage everyone to do is to utilize your chat function if you have any questions as we continue to move down the program. Now I'd like to reintroduce Mrs. Kalia Fleming. She's a community health educator, and we've worked a great deal with her talking about clinical trials and the like. And so she is going to tell you a little bit more about herself and some of the work that she's doing. And then we'll continue on with the program. So Kalia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hill. Thank you, the WECARE team, for having me present today, and good morning to everyone, soon to be good afternoon. Happy Friday. Dr. Snead, thank you for the great overview of clinical research and the importance of diversity within clinical research. I think it's a nice segue to what will be shared today. Again, my role is Research Partnership Coordinator and Community Health Educator at the Tampa Bay Community Cancer Network, also known as TBCCN at Moffitt. And been doing this work for a while, but today I'm particularly going to highlight the work of a colleague of mine. Her name is Vivian Cifuentes, and she serves as a clinical trials navigator educator. Fancy word for doing similar work like myself, where she is responsible for really helping to educate the community at large about clinical trials. Where does it all begin? Why is this necessary? What is the significance of that? And so that's how we will actually begin this segment of today's program. After that, I'll share an opportunity that may be of interest to folks who want to go into a deeper dive into what clinical trials are, risk and benefits of participation, why diversity in clinical trials matters, so on and so forth. And along those lines, I just want folks to keep an open mind as we discuss clinical trials and clinical research. We are very well aware of some of the misconduct that's been done at the hands of our medical care system, governmental system. On the flip side, we also know that the Aleve we take, the ibuprofen we take, everything else has gone through a clinical trial research process to test for safety and efficacy. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So I will go ahead and share my screen. What you will soon see will be actually the presentation from Vivian Cifuentes, who I mentioned. She has a great 15-minute presentation, which really centers on where does it all begin, clinical trials. And so what I'll do is everyone able to see this at full screen? All right, we're good to go. I will go ahead and play the video.
Hello, welcome to learning about clinical trials and where does it all begin. I'm Vivian Cifuentes and I'll be sharing some important information with you today. Thank you for being here. So I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to know what clinical trials are, how they work, what an informed consent is, and the importance of participation in clinical trials. Some people will ask, what are clinical trials? And they're definitely a very safe way of being treated. Clinical trial is simply another type of treatment that comes from a lab. Scientists use these great ideas, they put them into a theory and eventually into practice with some lab in the lab, and eventually comes into the clinical side of the entire process where humans will actually participate in this type of treatments. They're usually very safe. There's a lot of rules and regulations to follow in order to use these new treatments in humans. And in our center, we definitely do research, and the trials are obviously focused on finding either a cure for cancer or a improvement of life quality, or sometimes we are trying to prevent cancer from happening at all. So at this moment, sometimes people will ask, tell me about the side effects of clinical trials. And in many ways, when we do a clinical trial, we're also addressing the diminishment of side effects, because the standard of care, which is what we already have approved by the FDA and what is used on a regular basis for many people, not just in our country, but around the world, present severe side effects. And some of the trials that we are working on are basing their research in finding new treatments with less side effects. And as I mentioned before, some of these clinical trials focus on the improvement of the quality of life or extending life. Even though some people will live with cancer for the rest of their lives, some of these trials focus on, or the objective is to extend life with good quality. So research studies involve humans, and this is what makes a difference between the research in lab and research in the clinical side. It involves humans, and the focus or the objective is to make sure that the new treatments that we're trying are better than the standard of care. And in somehow along the line within these trials, we are comparing what we already have in the standard side with the new trial drug to ensure that the new one is of best quality and best effectiveness than what we already have. So that's one of the main objectives. And obviously the participation of humans makes the trial, I would say, more valid because it gives us better evidence. So there are 4 types of trials. One is the prevention, the screening, the treatment, and the quality of life. And obviously, prevention is we're looking to reduce the risk and to prevent cancer from happening. The screening is to make sure that we have something in our hands that will actually find the disease. And the earlier we find a disease, the easier it is to cure it or to control it. Obviously, we, with a trial that is actually treating, is to treat the disease, either to control it or to eradicate it. And obviously the quality of life is because we always want to make sure that the patient has a good quality of life. So we have to make sure that even though we may have a situation where we deal with cancer, we want to make sure that we have the possibility of live with quality. So how do they work? Well, they are designed to compare the standard of care, like I mentioned before, and those are the drugs that have been already approved by the FDA, with the treatments that we are trying. That's how they work. We compare. And in order to compare, we need to use them with humans to see how people respond to these new drugs. And this process is very, very regulated and very monitored. So because we always have to ensure that the safety of the patient is priority. There are 4 phases in a clinical trial. And the phase number 1 is the first time it's actually used in humans. And what we're trying to do at this point is to find the effective dosage and the exact dosage to maintain the level of toxicity safe for the human. And usually we will actually recruit at least 50 participants, usually no more than 80. And when that's done, it goes into phase 2, and phase 2 is to further ensure that the definition of safety of the toxicity is there. And the priority is always in every phase, the safety of the patient. At this point, we will recruit from 80 to 300 patients. And sometimes at this point, the drug is actually approved to be thrown into the general market because the findings are so magnificent that at this point, the FDA decides that it's actually a safe and efficient drug to provide to the general market. Phase 3 is basically the last phase of the trial, indeed. And at this moment, we are trying to ensure that this drug is better than the standard of care one, that the one that already exists, approved by the FDA. And we are comparing at this moment the new drug, the one that's on trial, to the one that's already approved. And we will enroll more than 1,000 patients for this particular phase. Now, sometimes, as I said before, when drugs are approved during phase number 2, they skip number 3. Okay, phase number 3. And when phase number 3 is over, that we ensure the safety of the patient, we ensure that we have the toxicity level that is safe for the patient, that we have the right dosage, that we know that is better, the results, the outcome of this drug is better than the ones that we already have approved. Then it goes into the general market, and even after it's been approved, it goes under phase number 4. And phase number 4 is a continuance of surveillance, because we want to make sure that at that time when this drug is being used by millions sometimes of people, we want to make sure the new findings of potential findings are not harmful to the health of the patients. So therefore, we have to monitor this drug even on phase 4 after it's been approved, because we want to make sure that at all times, the safety of the patient is our priority. In order to participate in a trial, we definitely have to inform the patient of what the patient is getting himself into. And in order to do that, we have what we call the informed consent. And the informed consent is a process with a document. And I said it's a process because this document requires an educational session. And a coordinator of the trial will sit down with the patient and explain all the details about this clinical trial. This consent or this document will talk about the benefits, the risks, any charges, any responsibilities on the patient's behalf, our responsibility as researchers, and definitely the expectations. At this moment, the patient has also the opportunity to ask all the questions that come to mind. And nothing can happen, nothing at all in regards to the clinical trial participation before that patient signs the consent, okay? One of the things that I need to inform you of is that the patient usually doesn't sign this consent right away. When the patient is told that he or she may be eligible for a trial, the patient will take this consent home or wherever he wants to and discuss it with family members, with doctors or healthcare providers of his choice aside from our institution. And then after he makes the decision, he can come back, have the informed consent session with the coordinator again, and sign it. Then that's when the participant will start with the pre-screening process to ensure that the patient is eligible for participation. Now, this is very important to understand. Being in a clinical trial is voluntary. There's no coercion, there's no obligation, no one can force you into participating in a clinical trial. However, once you sign the consent, there is a commitment, and obviously we expect you to keep that commitment until the end of the trial. Nevertheless, you are not obligated to participate entirely in the clinical trial if you decide to withdraw in the midst of it, or at the beginning, or towards the end. It's your choice, it's voluntary. So you have the right to quit at any time you want. Keep in mind that if you choose to withdraw from a clinical trial prior its ending, it's necessary you let the coordinator know, just to make sure there's no need of weaning you out of the drug. Sometimes just dropping and withdrawing and not taking the drug overnight may cause some side effects that you want to avoid. Who can participate? Many people will ask. Well, I'd like to say that anybody can participate. Nevertheless, you have to go through the pre-screening process and confirm that you are eligible to participate. This eligibility process is determined by inclusion and exclusion criteria. And it's like a checklist. If the study has 10 items in the inclusion criteria and you check all of them, you say, wow, I can participate. However, if the exclusion criteria list has 10 items and you have one checked out, then you're not able to participate. So both lists have to kind of align in order to participate in a clinical trial. Okay? And obviously, This process helps investigators achieve best significant results. Does it cost to participate? This is a very general concern and very valuable one. As participant of a clinical trial, at one point in my life, I wanted to make sure if it was going to cost me any money. Well, we tend to forget as patients that we have payments, and we have deductibles, and we will always be responsible for those regardless of the fact that we participate in a clinical trial. In addition to that, there may be some extra costs that at the time of the informed consent, you may be informed. The other thing that I recommend is for someone that is actually contemplating participation in a trial to speak to their insurance company. They can let you know if there will be some coverage on the participant's pocket, or if the insurance will cover everything related to the study. Now, usually anything that goes under the list of a standard of care, any care, like for example, some lab work, some imagery work will be considered standard of care that is covered by the insurance company without any doubt. Nevertheless, anything that is extra, any extra lab work, any extra imagery work, any drug that is on trial, experimental drug, that will be covered by the sponsor. However, I will always check with the insurance company and with the coordinators to see if they have any information in the protocol that will let you know if you have any extra cost out of your pocket besides the co-payments and deductibles. Well, some people will say, well, how long do I have to participate in a trial? Each trial is different. Each trial has its own protocol, its own rules and regulations. So it's difficult to tell you you'll be in a trial for 3 months. So I was in a trial for a year and a half. Some trials will last more than 5 years. It all depends on the trial. So it's good to go through that informed consent, because that's when you will be answered this question specifically related to the trial that you'll be participating in. Now, remember, even though the trial may last 15 months or 5 years, you can withdraw at any time. It's voluntary. And here's some references of the information that I have given you if you like to look into clinical trials a little bit deeper. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that you have learned something new today. If you have further questions about clinical trials, feel free to call my extension, what you see on the screen, 813-745-3952. Or if you like some more information on our programs through the library, feel free to write that at that particular email address that you see on the screen, or call them at 813-745-1690. And
All right, everyone. And so that was a really nice overview / synopsis of kind of a clinical trials 101, what they are, what you can expect. I really love that she highlighted that participation is voluntary. We do get that asked quite a bit when doing community presentations. I would just like to add here that per Dr. Snead's opening comments and some things that Vivian mentioned, you know, we talk a lot about the need for diversity in clinical trials. And it's not just physiological diversity. It's not just biological diversity. Where you live, work, and play can definitely impact how you metabolize medicine. It can definitely impact how you follow instructions or are compliant with taking medicine, so on and so forth. I would also like to reiterate that there are different types of trials. And so we often hear from people, well, I'm not sick, I don't have cancer, I'm pretty healthy, can I still participate? She did a great job highlighting inclusion and exclusion criteria. So that will vary based on what the trial is about, but ultimately, yes, we do have healthy individuals who participate in trials all the time. I myself am a severe hemiplegic migraine sufferer, so I do get approached quite a bit to participate in trials. Compared to healthy individuals who can also participate to see about safety and efficacy of the treatment options being offered. The last comment I would like to make in relation to the actual presentation is that we often think of clinical trials as just therapeutic drug treatments. You do have trials that also include, as she mentioned, quality of life, different therapeutic activities outside of drug treatment and therapy. Does hydrotherapy, for example, work with fibromyalgia patients or those in stage 4 osteosarcoma type of bone cancer? So clinical trials can ask a variety of questions, and it's not simply only focused on one particular aspect of drug treatment. Having said that, Dr. Hill mentioned earlier about sharing an opportunity with you all. I'm quickly going to do a screen share here. And so what I'm doing in this particular opportunity, it's an educational study. I am not drawing any labs from anybody. Don't worry. We're not coming to your house to get any samples. It's an educational study about clinical trials. And what this does is it's a nationwide initiative that's being undertaken by the National Cancer Institute, so NCI, National Outreach Network. They are leveraging community health educators across the nation to educate a little under 5,000 people nationwide about clinical trials. So in this session, we'll dive deeper into what are some of the risks and benefits of clinical trial participation, why diversity in trials matter, what is this whole informed consent process, why is it important, who reviews clinical trials before they're implemented to the public. I also give some very good examples of, Vivian mentioned the 4 phases of clinical trials. At times, sometimes we do have to utilize emergency authorization. So sometimes drugs and treatments need to be approved for use prior to going through all phases of the trial. We saw that years ago with the anthrax outbreak, and we certainly have seen it now with the COVID vaccine, right? It was being disseminated and implemented before Pfizer got the final FDA approval, but obviously we know we had to weigh out the risk and the benefits of life and death and quality of life and why that was done. So we do speak about that in more detail in this educational session. It lasts roughly about an hour, done in about 45 minutes. It's interactive. It can be held in small groups, Zoom or via phone. Folks just need to be 18 years or older to participate. And here on the screen, you'll see reside in particular counties, Hillsborough, Pinellas, Polk, or Pasco County. If you do not reside in one of those counties, but you're interested in learning more, I will put in the chat the contact information. I can perhaps link you up with another health educator who's closer to your region who can help you with this educational project as well. We do offer a small token of appreciation for participants, a gift card thanking them for their time, for sitting through the educational session. Again, it's a really interactive and engaging educational opportunity. What we're not doing is we're not linking you or recruiting you for any particular trial. It's really just to increase awareness and knowledge. Should you have to in the future participate in a clinical trial or just want to learn more about clinical trials in general. And so I will stop sharing, answer any questions. I'll also go ahead and put in the chat this actual flyer as well as the contact information. And I'll also put in the chat a link to Vivian's video, which can be found on YouTube. Any questions thus far?
I'm watching along. They seem to be pretty quiet today.
Well, I have a question. I hear there's a clinical trial dealing with music therapy. Dr. Hill, do you know anything about that? Can you share that with our group here?
The music therapy, well, we've actually done some studies on music therapy as a treatment modality to kind of help blunt some of the aggression and agitation we see in patients with Alzheimer's disease and all. And so that's an example of something, as Clea was commenting on, that's not invasive. It's not taking a blood draw or anything, but it does actually improve the quality of life for patients with Alzheimer's disease, as well as, you know, the person who's having to take care of someone with Alzheimer's disease and they're having a lot of problematic behaviors. So I actually did put in the chat some information for you all. We encourage you again to maybe reach out to Ms. Fleming if you're interested in her opportunity. But if you want to find out about trials, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov and find out what's going on in your area, what trials are going on in relation to maybe a certain disease or problem that you have. And then you can always reach out to people like us. We also wanted to invite you to our e-library so that you can find out, again, additional information about some of the things that are going on, particularly related to the pandemic. We have a lot of past workshops that were recorded where Dr. Snead, myself, and others have been sharing very valuable information about the changing daily changes associated with the pandemic. So long answer for your question, Dr. Snead, but yes, there are all kinds of studies out there, and music therapy, pet therapy have all been used in different forms or fashion to kind of help with patients with aging problems, particularly in neurodegenerative disorders.
Yeah, well, yes, Dr. Hill, I brought that up, and I wanted all of us here to be able to hear that response because, to be perfectly honest, when I'm sitting there with a patient, and I know you've had the very same experience, and people are saying, well, when are they going to figure this out, to help out my problem today? And, I'm realizing that when they're saying, when are they going to figure it out? They is me. Okay, they is all of us. And so, we need to continue to amass as much data on as many therapies for people from very many communities as possible. And so, to the extent that all of you are here present today, and, if we can continue to build a relationship with many of you, if we can continue to be able to reach out to you at a future date, as opportunities come along, we want to be able to build a network. And that's really one key component of WECARE. We want to be able to build a network so that it may not be you individually, but you may know somebody either in your family or in some of the organizations you're a part of. It may be a church member. It could be almost anything at all, a neighbor that may have a particular problem. And when people are looking for solutions to problems, we want to be able to give it to them. But we have to be able to test out a therapeutic to know that it's going to produce an outcome that we expect to have that will be positive for them. So not everything involved will be dangerous to the people that we're trying to recruit into a study. I see an individual that has their hand up. Did someone have their hand raised?
Someone have their hand up. I did.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
Hi,
Yes, Rajesh.
hello, sir. Yeah. Sir, can you explain the role of pharmacist in the clinical trials?
Can we explain the role of the pharmacist in clinical trials?
Yes. And also, sir, can you tell me a bit more about does the drug repurposing request the clinical trial?
Oh,
Okay. I did, Dr.
Drug
Hill.
repurposing.
So
take
he was saying two questions. One was, what's the role of the pharmacist? And then if I understand correctly, your second question was, do repurposed drugs require clinical trials and all? So did you want to start out, or you want me to?
Well, yeah, I tell you, yeah, let me answer the first part, because as a pharmacist and as a PharmD, I can tell you that right here at the University of South Florida, I was actually a PI on not one, but two drug clinical trials. So, very often we think only physicians can do that. Well, when I told them I wanted to be the site principal investigator, they said, well, you're not a physician. And I said, well, yeah, I'm not. What does that mean? And we went back and actually we found out, yeah, they went back to the company. And so you all may have heard of a medication, Caduet, that's on the market right now, a combination of amlodipine and atorvastatin. I was actually the site investigator for that here at USF. And then there was another medication called omapatrolat, which was a precursor to the neprilysin inhibitors that you find on the market. The drug name right now is Entresto. So I was a PI for a clinical trial, before that drug came on the market. But typically and usually you'll find pharmacists involved in clinical research in terms of compliance, medication management. We have a very active clinical investigational research pharmacy here at USF. We have a corresponding pharmacy colleague component over at Moffitt Cancer Center. I think they employ somewhere between 5 and 8 research pharmacists. And then we have the very same component over at Tampa General Hospital. And what we do is manage the products that come in from various companies. We do the preparation, we do the blinding, we do the drug preparation for blinding. So sometimes we'll have to take the medication and actually encapsulate it so that the person taking it cannot tell if it's actually the real medication or the other medication. And then pharmacists have also become a very big component of working with the pharmaceutical companies. We have one of our former students, Dr. Chris Koenig, that has been a very integral part of a biotech company. So that's just a couple of things. So really, there's no limit to what a pharmacist can do. The most important thing we can do is train people how to perform a task. And it's something that Dr. Hill, that I'll turn over to her now, is helping to lead right now for our Tenasia College of Pharmacy and building certificate programming and other components to help train pharmacists to be able to perform all these different tasks along the way in the clinical trials.
Yes, and so I was just going to add, I mean, it's endless what a pharmacist can do. Some of the industry-sponsored trials that I've been a part of have included me recruiting, the patients for it, but certainly preparing the medication, labeling it, then checking for adherence, monitoring the patient for side effects, and it kind of goes on and on. But we have to prepare and distribute or dispense the medication in a similar fashion like what we would do in our standard practice. And so a lot of the same duties apply in clinical research studies. But as Dr. Snead mentioned, we are in the process of developing a program designed to actually help people who might be interested in becoming a clinical research coordinator. And this might be something interesting to our pharmacy students that are on the line today. But for those of you that may have an interest in getting more involved, we'll be teaching you really like the ABCs or the foundational principles of getting involved in studies so that you too can be a PI like Dr. Snead and or be involved in studies like myself. So yes, it's kind of endless. And so then to answer your second question, Rahish, yes, repurposed drugs to some degree really go through clinical trials. We have a lot of off-label use a lot of times, but in order for us to get the FDA approval for an indication, clinical trials are necessary for us to fine-tune the right and correct dose, as well as thinking about, what would be appropriate for Dr. Snead and myself versus our children versus our parents, so those kind of things are really important. And part of why we're doing today's programming is also to teach you some of the other things that we take into consideration and why we want individuals like Joseph to participate versus someone like Dr. Austin to participate, because there might be some different things that are going on in the body based on, again, things related to genetics, not just race. It could be age, it could be comorbid conditions and the like, but that's what clinical trials allow us to evaluate so that we can, in an organized scientific fashion, look at all of those contributing factors so that we know that the outcomes, we've taken all those kind of things into considerations and not made some kind of assumptions. So for patient safety purposes, clinical trials allow us to be able to say with confidence that we know drug A is going to work in all of us and not just a cross-section of the population, or it's only intended for a cross-section of the population. So as Kalia was sharing, the type of migraine that she has, we have to be extremely particular about which medication we may use, because in some cases it could cause another problem because of a side effect that it causes, or it might interact with another medication. So, that's the reason, again, why we encourage you all to consider clinical trial participation. Okay.
Dr. Hill, let me add on one more thing to that, just again to expand the awareness of all of our people here present. When I did my in-shape study here in the community, again, that was on 4 African-American churches and 1 Latino/Hispanic church. I really wish, again, I'm very young in my career at the time. If I had known then what I know now, I would have brought along a human anthropologist to actually do do those research trials with me. And I'll tell you why, because again, that's why we want to move the discussion a little bit beyond race and ethnicity, because the 4 churches I went to had 3 different denominations, okay? There were 2 Baptist churches, one African-American church was primarily Catholic, and the other one was a non-denominational. And the culture in those 4 churches were very different from each other, and how I had to communicate, how I had to just their belief systems overall. And so if I had really known I was going to encounter that, I would have brought along a human anthropologist, so that by now we could better understand the cultural aspects of what it means by geography, denomination, and other components. And back to Ms. Fleming's statement, we need people from diverse areas, because, you know, the environment, you know, what type of things are in the water that may be affecting, you know, how drugs are metabolized in the body, because they're either accumulating or something in the water is actually depleting something. And so we clearly want people to know and understand that there is somebody, there are very, very, very smart researchers doing research on all of this stuff. But we need what they need help in is getting people finding access to the right people, so that we can figure out the answers to these questions that we have. So I just thought I would actually kind of put that out there. Thank you very much.
Well, you know, Dr. Snead, you bring up some really good points. I'm not sure, was that you talking, Kalia?
Yep, but go ahead. Okay.
I just was going to say, you hit it right on the head. I was noticing we have Ms. Collins from Arizona. We have a professor from University of Mexico. We have USF students. We have representation from the OBGYN department, our psych community. We have our AHEC partners. So good to see you. And we even have someone from the University of India. And just like you said, the environmental influences certainly can impact, again, all kinds of outcomes as we talk about just drug treatment. But if we think about what's going on with the pandemic has been a worldwide experience. Psychologically, however, it's impacted all of us different, you know. And so one of the things that, again, clinical trials allow us to do is to evaluate all those different factors. So we just really applaud you all for being here, being curious about this. And again, we're just touching the surface today. But I did want to kind of move on just in respect to time after Kalia. But again, please continue to put questions in the chat so we can have this discussion. Kalia, you were about to say something before I interrupted you.
Yeah, I just wanted to address Ms. Collins' comment, a question about how responsive the community has been to the educational trials. And, you know, feel free, anyone else, to jump in with your own experience in facilitating CTs in the community. But as far as my educational presentation, it's been really an onslaught of participation, particularly and surprisingly amongst college students. It could be that their gift card is for Amazon, I don't know. But I actually am getting the sense that because for my particular educational project, it's 18 and older, we often don't involve young adults when it comes to research. And so they're really eager to participate and become involved. We know there's also a disparity. We know females tend to be more represented than males in clinical trials, and those over the age of 65 are not represented as much. So I'm kind of seeing an uptick in those populations as well, with partnering with senior centers, as well as some of our local colleges and community colleges. So students are really, really taking hold of that opportunity.
That's really good. I wanted to also highlight Dr. Diane Allen Gibson. I'm not sure, Dr. Gibson, if you are willing to turn your camera on, but she's one of our scientists and faculty members in the Tanasia College of Pharmacy. And we've been talking about clinical trials and research today, but she actually does research prior to it getting to use in humans. And so we appreciate the work that she does, because she works with mouse models, some scientists work with the Petri dish where they're working, in labs, and they actually ensure or give us some preview to how medicinal properties or products may actually work in humans by comparing it to outcomes in animals. So first, we want to just thank you, Dr. Diane Gibson, and then secondly, just say that that is a whole nother level of work. And sometimes we refer to it as translational research, where we go and combine and researchers.
Dr. Hill, you're on mute.
I apologize. I did all that talking and nobody heard anything I said.
No, we just missed the very last part, man.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just saying, as the ghost hit the mute button, just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Diane Gibson, also for the work that you're doing. But if we were to do a study in every city based on representation here, it gives us a greater cross section of really how a drug or a device or some kind of medicinal intervention would really work in the general population. And that's the whole goal of why we do research. And so we want representation from these different age groups, these different ethnic groups, these different social and psychological backgrounds, just to make sure that the science is more valid. Dr. Diane Gibson, again, welcome. I hope you heard my thank you and honor of the work that you're doing, and we're so glad to see you here, because your work allows us to get to the level of clinical research and the things that we're doing, both in industry in that regard. So did I do justice in commenting?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for for coming out today. This was a really important session to have. And yes, you did do due diligence. I do more bench research, but I have had some opportunities working with TBCC and with Ms. Fleming, where I did some community-based participatory research. And to me, I think that was such a rewarding experience for me, because you get to go and meet individuals and hear what the problem is. And then as an academic person, we then need to be able to be empathetic and understand what's going on in the community so we can help better serve them. So this was very, very important, that we need to encourage clinical trial participation, and that it should be a holistic approach. I agree with Dr. Snead. Having an anthropologist on a team helps a lot. And I think that's where we're moving right now for doing all of these type of studies. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. I want to next kind of move on, and Dr. Austin will allow you and Pascal to kind of help us navigate this last section. But we have, fortunately, here another member of our team, Mr. Hiram Green, who I don't think was on when we made our initial introductions, but he is our community relations person for the college, but he's also a foundational member of our WECARE team. And one of the great things about Mr. Green is that he has his hands, his feet very well established in the Tampa Bay community, and it's been such a resource for us in terms of connecting with people. But he also has had the experience of being a community member of the Institutional Review Board. And one of the comments in the video was about the processes that are in place that provide information to the participant about the trial. And that information basically comes after having gone through a very, very fine-tooth combed process where the researchers actually are submitting their protocol idea to a group of scientists across different backgrounds, who then determine, one, the scientific merit, but most importantly, the risks to the consumer or person who is participating. And they make sure that every T is crossed and every I is dotted in terms of patient safety measures, so that people are not inappropriately mistreated or enduring any harm because of exposure or the experience associated with the trial. So in that capacity, Mr. Green, I had wanted him to really just share his insights in terms of what being on a committee like that can do and does do for people to just feel more secure about participating and knowing that the process is such that by the time you're approached about participating, there's been other groups that have looked at it to make sure that it is going to be a good experience for you. So I'm not sure, Mr. Green, if you can, or if you want to turn your camera on just yet and maybe give us a few points of insight. But I do think that this part is really important because the consent process is what assures us that you understand what's going to transpire, but the IRB process is what actually allows us to have the project or protocol vetted before anything starts. And that's what she was really trying to emphasize in the video. So Mr. Green, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am, I'm ready. Thank you so much. And I apologize that I'm late. In fact, I'm not going to film my camera now because I have two computers, one on watching and the other in my hand because I couldn't get on from my one computer. So I'm going to say what I have to say, and then I'll turn my camera on. One of the things that I don't think people recognize in this whole process is just how detailed it is as we move forward. I have no medical background, zero medical background. In fact, I was sent to a meeting one day by a gentleman, some of you may know him by the name of Leroy Selman. I was working in athletics. And he says, "Hiram, could you go to this meeting for me?" And I said, "Okay, I'll go over to the meeting." And it was a institutional review board committee. And what I did not understand was, I didn't understand that, first of all, what in the world am I doing at a scientific committee meeting? The most important thing about that, I found out that I was at that meeting because I was a layperson. I have a degree in business administration, nothing to do with medicine. But what they wanted me to do is to make sure that I had understanding of, from a layperson perspective, what it consists of. Now, it took me a little while to understand that, but once I understood it, there's some things that I want to make sure I go over with it so that once I got into it a year or so, I said, wow, that's why they wanted me here. Some of the things I was responsible for, I remember going through and thinking, okay, what am I supposed to be doing here? First of all, one of the things they said, the risk of the subject, I had to be responsible for making sure that the risk-benefit relationship was good, that they're not going to be getting into anything that was going to be imposing on that. So as I began to study, you have two studies, you have the informed consent form, and then you have the studies that all the doctors understand. The studies that all the doctors understand is something totally different than me, but I can understand is how much risk this means to the patient that we're going to be studying. So when I went into my studies, every study I went into was very focused on the risk to the patients that was going to be studying. The second thing I recognized is that they had two people from the community on each committee. They could not have the meeting. The doctors can't have the meeting unless one of us was there. And I said, wow, that's pretty interesting because it's important that we have doctors' information, but they want to make sure that the person who is just a layperson is there to understand everything that's taking place. So the other thing I was informed about it, my understanding was to make sure that I understand the informed consent. They take the informed consent from a very difficult, for me, understanding of medicine to have to break it down to what a layperson like myself can understand it on a level I can understand it. So when I would read the general operation, I would read them, and then I read the informed consent, and I said, I have no idea what they're trying to say. So they have to go back, redo it, so that a person like myself can understand what the informed consent is saying. That's how detailed the IRB was to make sure that it was understood and that everybody had to be on the same page, even a person who's not in medicine. The other thing I made sure, from my perspective, I had to make sure the appropriate research plan was adequate provision for monitoring the data safety of the people who were participating in this research. So I had to make sure I understood it and that that the doctors know that I understood it, so that when they go to, after get past the IRB, that they go out to the communities, that the community has a better understanding of what that was. The third thing I think is when some of the and all the subjects are likely to be vulnerable to coercion. So, for an example, if you're going to have $5,000 given to a person for pregnancy, and they need to make sure that their baby is taken care of, and they're going to do it not because of the safety of the baby, but because they need the money, that's something that we can't do. So we look at things like that. I'm not saying for things like that, to make sure that there is some very clear understanding between the safety of the participant and what they're giving them from a monetary perspective. So all those things are things that, as I began to move into it, I say, wow, those are safety concerns that the IRB has to make sure that everyone is treated correctly. And the other thing I want to say is this: we've talked about the subjects are equitable, all type equitable. So I'm looking at, okay, if this is disease state, what's going on? Is it equitable in the people who they're trying to get into your protocol? So I look at all those things as a person who doesn't know a lot about medicine, but I can understand is it equitable or not. So I look at in that. So I think every institutional review board, as I understand it, if it's still that way, it's been 12 years since I've been off of it, but if it's still that way, those are the things that I think they put in place, still have in place, I believe, so that everybody can recognize that those things are being considered long before this protocol gets out to the public. So I think that's from my perspective. Those are the experiences I had from my perspective in dealing with this important fact. It wasn't until I got with Dr. Snead that I started working again with this. And I said, wow, it's amazing, because those are some of the things that I learned in the process. And now those are the things I hope that I can take to the communities that we serve, that help them understand that it is not just something that is thrown out there to them. It's very, very, very well done. And I asked the question once on a meeting we had with the national representative. I said, have you ever had in the United States, ever had anything that breached those protocols? And its answer to that question was not in the United States. We never had, because we have so much in place that we're not going to allow those things to happen. So I hope that helps you. That's where I still have a heart for clinical research, and that's why I'm working with Dr. Snead and Dr. Hill on what we do for our communities. Thanks, Dr. Hill.
Great comments. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Green? Because certainly the IRB process, the consenting process, all of those were great, excellent points. And again, I think that a lot of times people just feel like clinical research is this big black hole, but I do want to, for example, tap on Dr. Snead to say that, you know, we watched the pandemic unfold as something that was affecting certain populations a little bit more. And then we see the development of a vaccine, and we now have oral medications, and we're doing monoclonal antibodies. And if we don't have, would you agree, if we don't have the people that are affected by the disease the most participating, it's more risky, you know, for us to use these therapies in them than not. And that clinical research could really help us answer those questions. And as because I think about just the morbidity and mortality, you know, that's occurred with the pandemic, and how far ahead and how quickly the scientific community, you know, rose to the challenge to really try to help people. But what thoughts do you have or want to add to that in terms of the pandemic?
Are you asking me specifically? Well, of course, I think the pandemic is really all the way from one end to the other. Is probably the best way to put it. The pandemic has really shown that, you know, how far we've come in the clinical research arena. But it actually has shown, you know, many of the fallacies we have in our ability to go out and get credible research done and communicated back to the community appropriately. You know, I still remain, you know, for lack of a better term at this point, miffed at the fact that after we've injected 400 million doses into arms, and we've had the chance to observe people, that we still have the level of misinformation going out. And we still have not shown the ability to be able to communicate more broadly with people. And I just feel that if we had done a better job over the past decade of really being more inclusive in terms of getting people in communities to better understand science in general, you know, communicating with people in communities all over the place and getting them involved in research, you know, maybe by now, you know, much of the misinformation would not be holding on, because people would have not only had the opportunity to hear from people like me and other researchers here at USF and Moffitt and Tampa General and other locations, but they themselves in the community would have been direct and active participants in the research. And so, you know, we're fighting an uphill battle right now. And I'm hoping that we can use the pandemic to kind of springboard directly into the future, which again, you know, Dr. Hill, Dr. Austin, you know, we have had this conversation over and over again about the role of WECARE, you know, our burgeoning collaboration with Ms. Fleming and TDCCN and Moffitt overall, the growing clinical research enterprise over at Tampa General Hospital and here at USF, to make sure that coming out of the pandemic, and we will come out of it one day, that we come out of it stronger and more prepared for the next time that we may encounter something like the pandemic or something else. And we don't know what it might be, but we need to have communities engaged at every level so that we are far more prepared coming out of it than we were coming into this current pandemic.
Okay. Well, thank you for those comments. I'm not sure if you saw the question from Mrs. Barthelemy. She asked if we had or planned on having any studies related to the COVID vaccines and the Prolia medication. I know we've done a few things with the vaccines, but I don't know about the Prolia. Mm-hmm.
Well, I can tell you right now, I don't know the answer to that at the current moment. I'm not aware of any particular study in that regard, but I can tell you that we have become a valued location for many companies to come and work with during the pandemic. And we have, even today, I looked at 2 more proposals that people were bringing up, you know, just on thoughts of, well, what about this and what about that? And let me address that very quickly, Dr. Hill, just for our group. As part of the presentations I give, I show where all across the world, all around the world, we had researchers that were looking at natural products, okay? A whole host of natural products. I mean, we were looking at everything. We scanned every library of every drug out there. And of course, and then clinical trials came after that. And you need the clinical trial to confirm what we hope will be a therapeutic. You know, we thought hydroxychloroquine may be an effective therapeutic because of what happened in the first SARS back in 2002 and in 2003 through late breaking research back then. It did not work. You know, we've had the ivermectin study that's really kind of overtaken this country and the world, and clinical trials have gone on and have just been very inconsistent and not shown what people thought they would. But on the back end of that, we have, you know, emerging studies with fluvoxamine, which is a SSRI inhibitor, that appear to be showing very good efficacy, you know, for people who have been infected. And of course, we have other medications, Paxlovid and molnupiravir, that are coming onto the market pretty soon, probably under EUA. But you know, when I take a look at the clinical trials, I keep wondering, did we get enough diversity in all these studies to really indicate that it's going to impact everybody? You know, is it going to impact people in Louisiana that may be drinking a different type of water than the limestone-driven water that we have here in Florida? I mean, there's so many different components to research that we have to explore. And so I think the pandemic has shown the good and the bad. And I think the bad parts are fixable, but it's going to take energy, and it's going to take effort on the part of all of the people that we have here to integrate research into all of the different communities that we all are participants in right now.
Very good points. Very good points. I want to allow Ms. Edouard and Dr. Austin, if you have any comments you want to make regarding the topic at hand, as we wait to see if anyone else has any more questions. Mm-hmm.
No, I in particular do not have any additional comments or anything to add.
Okay.
And I'd just like to really thank Mr. Green. We often, of course, get to hear from Dr. Snead, and it's always exceptional. I won't even go into the kinds of things that we hear from the community about his presentations, and not just this community, but across the nation. And you as well, Dr. Hill. But it's so good to hear from Mr. Green, to hear about that community perspective on the IRB. You know, we work in close relationship, of course, with USF and other organizations doing research, and of course, dealing with IRB applications. And so it's really good to hear from Mr. Green, and to really have that assurance that, you know, that there are people like us who are making sure that everything is going as should. So thank you for having him on this session, and thank you, Mr. Green, for your presentation.
Thank you. And so we do want more people to get involved in these kind of things, and there are opportunities for more community membership involvement if you're interested. I put in the chat the WECARE email, so if you have any additional questions, want to connect to us, we will be transitioning, you know, as far as programming go. We're going to allow everyone to have a holiday break, but we're going to come back in the early spring, and this is a primer for our next series of programs, which will focus on why diversity matters in research. We'll have some especially for clinical researchers, and then some that'll be especially primed for community members like you. But we are really wanting you to know that we care. We care about your health, and part of your health is us obviously having to use medications. And as pharmacists, certainly we want to make sure you know that we're a trusted resource for you. I'd like to thank Ms. Fleming for providing us the exposure to the information you showed us in the video, but thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for representing and allowing us to work with TBCCN and Moffitt, because the work that you do make us stronger. I also want to thank Dr. Austin, because you're working with a protected group of women and their children, and certainly the whole family unit. And those are examples of protected populations, women and children, particularly. And it's so important that, again, the work that we're thinking about doing in clinical research gets to play out there. And I also want to acknowledge a colleague of ours, Dr. Rinker. He was a pharmacy director at what was Florida Hospital when the college got started, and he's been an avid supporter of everything that we've done with our program. But I also want to point out, he was sending me a note in the chat how he's willing to support whatever we're doing. And I want to say that a lot of times the hospital environment also serves as a nice place for clinical research. And it's the work of directors and colleagues in the pharmacy profession that really also help us, you know, get to answers about medical questions. And so again, we are so grateful that all of you attended today, and we do hope that you will look at our e-library so that you can again stay on top of things related to not just the pandemic, but we have other videos talking about other issues related to research matters, such as health disparities. We've got information if you're interested in doing a deeper dive looking at the Tuskegee study, and information about Henrietta Lacks in our e-library. We have things related to mental health outcomes outcomes, as well as Alzheimer's disease and more on cancer disparities. So please make sure that you look at it. But not only that, I would challenge you to be an ambassador, and that if you have a colleague or a family member that you think could appreciate this information, refer them to our e-library and encourage them to attend some of our future programs. We also want to hear from you to know what it is that we can do to help you be more empowered in your health, so that you can live a quality life and not a life with illness or dis-ease. So just know that WECARE cares. And as we transition into the holiday season, we ask that you be safe. If you're not vaccinated, please consider getting it, but be safe no matter what. And so again, we'll go ahead and allow you to get on with the rest of your day. We thank you so much for your time and attention. And we do really hope that the information that was shared today will help you in your understanding towards clinical research matters and the ABCs of clinical trials. So with that, I'm not sure if anyone else on the WECARE team would like to say anything else, but I will sign out at this time.
Thanks,